This is the CHGO Cubs podcast. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan, and we are coming to you on Friday, October 27th. And Brendan, the World Series begins tonight. The team that you and I and the rest of the CHGO Cubs team cover as part of this podcast, they do not play in said World Series tonight.
They don't. You can watch YouTube videos of the World Series they did play in, It wasn't that long ago. I don't know if you remember this.
Well, each passing moment, it gets further away.
It does.
But per usual, happy to have you joining us for the Friday edition of the CHGO Cubs podcast. As a note, if you are watching us on YouTube, we are not live, but we do read through the live YouTube chat. We read through the comments, so please leave your questions, comments, etc., and we will check them out, I promise. If you're listening on your podcast feeds, hello as well. Before we get any further, shout out to our guys over at the CHGO Bulls team, Peck, Dave, Will, Mark over across the pond. They do great coverage. The Bull season just started. They had a players-only meeting, Brendan, the first night, so things are off to a roaring start there, but our wonderful CHGO Bulls team will have you covered for the rest of this season. What do we want to talk about today, Brendan? We'll talk a little bit about the World Series. I think the Diamondbacks being in there is something that is going, really, or the Phillies, right? We talked about that with some of the players, but it's going to be something I think Cubs fans have a feeling on, right? If Atlanta, I think, had marched through the NL and was representing the National League, I think a lot of us would have been like, well, okay, whatever. But because it was the team that barely edged the Cubs out, and that they were 1-6 against in September, I don't know. People have feelings about it. We will talk about the rumors around some more brain drain for the Cubs, potentially in their front office and potentially their coaching staff. So some poaching happening across the league. We'll talk about that, what it means, etc. And then we'll talk about Kyle Hendricks. You and I we had not seen those rumors when you and I last spoke, Brendan, that the Cubs were maybe discussing a possible extension with him. Then there was another report on Thursday, I believe, from Jesse Rogers that said, I'm not hearing that at all, maybe possible, but not imminent. So we'll discuss the implications of that. But Brendan, I asked you this, I think, when the NLCS started, your general opinion on the Diamondbacks getting this far, knocking out some of our enemies. But now, there they are in the World Series, and just your general reaction to it. I'll start by saying I'm always and I know, we talk about the Cubs. In 2016, they were the best team in the league, and they won the World Series.
Won the World Series, correct.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
They were the best team poll to poll. They were the preseason favorite. They were the midseason everything, right? But I feel like every year we watch the playoffs not play out like chalk, right?
Yeah.
It is not an NCAA tournament where all the one seeds make it to the Final Four, right? And everybody's surprised every time. And I never really get it, right? Sometimes
this time
it works
you have
out
the new
that
playoff
way.
format, too. And you have comments from the guys saying, hey, it's kind of screwing up with our timing, the days off. So I think the new format is triggering some of this, call it flukiness, even though I don't think it's fluky. I think, they deserve to be in the World Series. But I think it's the accumulation of the new playoff format, but it's always been like this,
Well, you I think if you had a list of Brendan Miller quotes from our years of podcasting, baseball is stupid. I think is pretty close to the top, right?
Is. It's a dumb sport.
It's a crapshoot, man. And it's not a thing of luck either, right? The Diamondbacks are having to play really good baseball against the other team's best players, right? For weeks at a time. It's not just a couple games here and there, right? So I just always am people get surprised, what? It's chaos. In baseball, it happens pretty frequently, right? We've had a few, how many wild card teams end up winning the title, right? It happens all the time.
Yeah, well, you look at 2015, the Cubs won 97 games. And in the old format, they would have missed the playoffs. I don't think anyone was complaining about that.
Right.
If you want to design the playoffs and limit some of the flukiness, you have to go back to the 80s. Or I think it was the 80s, before our time, Corey, when it was just two teams in the playoffs from each league. They duke it out for the World Series.
Right.
The problem,
or soccer style, where it's just like,
style.
The Braves would have been the champion, right?
Well,
like,
there
that's
you
it.
go.
Good
I mean,
for
that's
them.
not, that's never going to happen.
No, of course not.
Yeah. And that's the point. It's an extreme, unrealistic expectation. The nature of baseball is, unless you're around 95 to 100 wins, the other teams are going to be all within the same tier of potential wins. You look at the D-backs, they won 84 games. You look at the Cubs, they won 83 games. That's a 1-game difference. I will complain throughout the offseason about Madrigal, Hosmer, Mancini, Barnhart, because you can easily make the argument if they just had half a win better of a player value. Maybe it's a different conversation. But once you're in that sphere of randomness, anything can happen. You look at the Cubs' run differential. You look at the total number of runs the Cubs scored. They scored 10 more runs in 2023 than they did in 2016. That's an absurd number if you think about that. Their offense, in an 83-win season, scored more runs than the World Series roster. That is insane. Projecting wins based on runs has a huge degree of error. The degree of error is about plus or minus 6 wins, according to your Pythag record expectation. If you look at the bell curve, the majority of the teams fall within plus or minus 6 wins. And then you try to project even like Pacoda projections or Fangraphs projections. They're also within that same tier of error. So if you try to project how many games you're going to win based on your run differential, look at the Cubs. If they're projected at 80 wins, within one confidence interval, if you want to call it that, is really 74 wins to 86 wins. If you're projected at 90 wins, let's say like the Phillies or whatever, projected at 90 wins, you're 84 to 96. But if you're projected, let's say at the Braves level, 98 wins, you're 92 to 104 in that confidence range. You're in the playoffs no matter what. You are a juggernaut type projected team that's likely going to make it. Those are the teams that probably deserve to play for a World Series and limit some of the 3-5 game series, a 7-game series in consecutive order. It's never going to happen. So this is how it is. If you want to cut out the playoff format, you got to go back to 2 teams. Otherwise, I like this format. I like having 12 teams in because you bring down and but you increase your scope of teams who should be in the conversation. The Cubs were just on the edge of it, but if they were to have gone into playoffs, who knows? Honestly, who knows? And that's always what we've said.
Well, and I think what the Diamondbacks getting here are other teams that are wild card teams. You go back to like the Nationals winning the World Series in 19, things like that. The Braves, right, being where they were at the trade deadline in 21 and making those moves and winning the World Series. What I think it shows, I was listening to the show with our guys, and I think Luke put it really well. As watching it, not necessarily making him angry or anything, but like a call to action to the Cubs where it's like, you missed on this team by a game and you were unable to beat them in September, and here they are in the World Series. So no more half measures, right? Every little game matters. Every little thing matters, because ultimately it might be the difference between you getting a ticket to the dance and not getting a ticket to the dance. And what we see time in and time out is getting in is potentially the biggest hurdle. You have to get in to give your roster a chance to get hot and play well for these few weeks in October and have a chance to win the World Series, right?
Yeah.
And the Diamondbacks in particular too, right? Like, what I think we can look at though is what is the key difference, to me at least, right? They're not the exact comparisons of teams, right? But I think the biggest difference that stands out to me is the Diamondbacks late in the season with guys like Ryan Thompson. They traded for Paul Sewald, who's now closing games for them, who closed the game to win the pennant for them. They assembled that bullpen later in the season. Not everybody, right? But it really rounded into form later in the season. And the Cubs didn't do that, right? They had the bullpen for the middle of the season, right? They had found their, particular, let's call it a trio, right? And ALLCITY and Leiter and Julian Merriweather, but they didn't have the answer once those guys predictably, right, as we've talked about, wore down and became more ineffective, etc. And that's what I think Luke was really getting at, was like, you had the shot. You were right to buy at the deadline. It was a good decision, right? But you didn't buy enough, and that should never be the attitude, right? Like, and I know you were talking to me, I think we were texting about it the other day, where it's like it's hard to shake, right? Like, you were right there with this
I was
team.
texting you. You weren't responding to me. It's a little bit different, but that's okay.
That's our bit.
Like, it's the reality. It's not even a bit.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? So I think it's a good lesson. And I think it's the lesson watching the Diamondbacks is not, here's the level of money you can spend and hopefully you win 83 games and get in. That's not the lesson, right? The lesson is do everything possible to get in the playoffs and make sure you get in there and have a roster that can take care of business over the course of, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, right? Yeah. And the Cubs did not do enough to ensure that they would have that opportunity, right? And we don't have to belabor those decisions because we've talked about them, but that's what really stuck out. And I think they were talking about it. I don't remember which broadcast it was. It might have been like Ron Darling and those guys the other night. But they were talking about how that bullpen really rounded into form like over the later portion of the season. And you saw them riding those same guys every night to shut down the Phillies, an offense that had been dropping bombs on everybody. And here come the Diamondbacks to shut them down, right? I think the Cubs had the guys to play the role of Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly and Brandon Pfaadt. I think they had those guys. What they didn't have was the bullpen to make it all the way through October. So even had they made it, I don't think that they could have gone on this run. But you go back and look at what moves could we have made to put ourselves in the position to make that run, and it seems pretty simple to how they would have gotten there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a one-game separation. It's not to say, the Diamondbacks are the gold standard. They made a lot of mistakes, too. Look at the roster. Sure. Like the Cubs, they gave away 600 plate appearances to guys that accumulated almost negative 1.5 WAR.
Yeah, they DFA'd Madison Bumgarner early in the season. Yeah,
they made mistakes. They were able to withstand the mistakes.
I think they DFA'd him in April, which is different than the Cubs playing Trey Mancini on July 30th, but I digress.
They've had issues. I think if you want to talk about some of the nitty-gritty details of what they did versus what the Cubs didn't do, it's marginal, but those marginal moves did pay off. I think the biggest thing for me, when we talk about having more urgency or going back to the Hosmer and Mancini and Barnhart playing time situations, what the D-backs did that I liked, and I was surprised even last year, of all the D-backs somewhat closely, I have a lot of friends who are D-backs fans, but what they did last year, they called up Corbin Carroll in 2022. And granted, top prospect, he did deserve the call up, no doubt about it. But in 2022, entering that season, he only had 29 plate appearances above A-ball. That's it, only 29. Okay? Actually, I'll take that back. 29 plate appearances at A-ball entering 2022. He graduated through AA very fast, barely played in AAA. Boom, you're in the big leagues, and you're whiffing a ton. His whiff rate was under 74%. For that power, not good. His strikeout rate was almost 30%, but they aggressively moved him up. They accepted some of the growing pains, and they were able to expose him at the same time learning information about Carroll that might have informed other decisions to bolster the roster. What I don't like, if you contrast that with the Cubs' decision in 2022, you know where I'm going with this. They were so conservative with the Matt Mervis situation.
Right.
And this is what I mean. You can really narrow it down to this if you want. Am I an idiot for bringing this up? Is this actual reality? I have no idea, but in my mind, it makes sense. Mervis not being called up left an unknown for the Cubs. That unknown translated into not ensuring and throwing resources in for first base.
Right.
That led to Eric Hosmer's free signing. We're not paying him any money. That led to then giving Trey Mancini a $20 million total dollar deal at $7 million per year, $14 million total. And that was in part due to your unknown at first base. If Mervis comes up, if he looks as bad as he did in 2023, then the iteration process starts kicking up. Maybe your projection becomes a little bit more clear and you go out and you get a first baseman. You don't go out and sign Trey Mancini. You don't go out and get Eric Hosmer. You get something a little bit more sure. And I think that's where, if you want to narrow it down, it goes down to that. The D-backs had more information. There definitely was roster decisions informed based on Carroll's 2022, and he used it to get better right away. And the reason they're in the World Series is basically because of Corbin Carroll.
Well, and I mean, Gabriel Moreno, right, as well, a guy they got from Toronto in 2022, but they let him play, right? They let the young guy play, and look at the way he's played for them.
It's not always about like promoting prospects. And I will always be super aggressive about this to a fault. It's not always about promoting prospects because you think they're going to be good. It's about promoting prospects so you know when they're going to fail. Right. You need them to fail.
You need this.
That way you can move on. That's the part I'm trying to say. I was never saying, oh, Matt Mervis is going to be a guy. I think you and I talked about this. I didn't think he was going to be a guy. I just wanted to rule that out fast so they can move on.
You're on. We could go find the audio, but you're on record of that toward the end of the 2022 season, no question.
Yeah, and like the 40-man crunch, not to go off on here, but like that to me wasn't worth the risk.
Right.
Protecting the 40-man was not worth the risk, in my opinion, because of that.
Before, wrapping this up, it's the World Series. The Cubs offseason is, where it is, and I think it is related to the Cubs. So that's why we're starting with this. Do want to get into some of the more Cubs-specific stuff that we've heard from over the past week. But, kind of bringing this conversation on the World Series to a close, the other team, finishing on the Diamondbacks, I do want to clarify, not me nor you or anyone is suggesting that the Cubs should operate like the Diamondbacks in a vacuum.
No.
Right? Some things that they do, right, you can replicate, right? And hey, this was good process. This led to good results. The reason that we talk about this, because the Cubs were neck and neck with this team, and they should be able to outdo them operationally.
Yeah.
And it's not even close. They have more resources than them. So when you're watching, like, what did this team do well with less resources than you, right? Or traditionally less resources than you? We can do that too, but we can also spend way over that to even fix some of those things. So I do, especially when you went 1-6 against this team in September, I get the frustration where people are like, look, this team did it, but you didn't, right? Yeah. And then you look across at the other team in the World Series, and they're sort of a different way of putting things together, right? Like they are the lesson in, look, they spent big. Money. And they did it. I saw the weirdest takes from people. And I mean, look, at this point, like Astros fans are what they are. But like of people being like, oh, the Rangers had to spend $800 million to beat the Astros. Yep, that's the plan. That's the goal. The point is to win, right? Like there's no rule. There's certain rules on how you get there. But specifically, like there's no set rule on you have to only win with your own players or you have to only win by spending money. Who cares? I always used to find it really insane when people would say, oh, the Yankees bought their championships. It's in the rules. The goal is to win. Who cares, right? Like they spent big on Corey Seager and Marcus Semien, and like there's obviously other players, you know what I mean, identifying Garcia and giving him an opportunity and letting him flourish, et cetera. Like it's not just about spending money. But there's different ways to get there. But ultimately, like, you have to do what you have to do to get there. And that's what the Rangers needed to do. They needed to cover up. They had certain developments. They had certain areas where they were succeeding in their developments. And you see that across their roster. They have a lot of good young players that are contributing to this. But they needed to go over the top, especially in that division. And they did it. And now they won a pennant and are playing in the World Series.
This is how baseball is. To your point, you can go out and spend $500 million on your middle infield. Sure, go about and do that. The D-backs, I think they had like a negative 17 run differential, that may be up a little bit.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, in the negatives. The Cubs had a plus like 100 run differential, whatever it is. The differentiation of those two teams is large, right? And it ended up being just one game. That's why baseball is stupid. I'm never going to use the D-backs as a template. Like, no offense to that. I'll use the Braves as a template. They've been doing this for so long. The Dodgers have been in it year in, year out, despite some of the playoff lack of success. you don't want to be talking about what did the D-backs do that the Cubs didn't, and what can we replicate? It's more like, what are the Braves doing? Can we take what they're doing well, grow on that, and carve out our own brand? Forget all this comparison. Like, you should be the gold standard. It should never be what are they doing versus what we're doing.
Right. I think regardless of how the playoff format is, or, who's getting there or not, the ultimate goal is still you want to be the best team. That's what gives you the best chance. The Braves losing, the Dodgers losing doesn't negate that. The baseball playoffs are very difficult. Anybody can beat anybody in a 3-game series or a 5-game series or a 7-game series, right? We know this. It happens all the time. But at the end of the day, like, what you want is to be that top team. That is what gives you the best chance of getting there, whether the Braves choke that away or not, right?
That's always going to be like that. And even if you are that 100-win team, you get in the playoffs and crazy stuff's going to happen. Right. This is just how it is. As a fan of baseball, it is the worst sport to be a fan of. If you're a fan of basketball, football, your expectations align with reality more times than not. Your expectations as a baseball fan often don't align with reality. You are sick. I am sick. This will always be the case. Baseball is stupid, Corey. It's always going to be like this. So just limit the stupidness.
I think Manfred is putting that in the running for the league slogan next year.
Yeah.
Look, it is what it is, and we should all put our heads on our pillows at night and remember that when the Cubs were the best team in the league, they did win the World Series. There was some nonsense in those playoffs, and it was close, but the best team won in 2016, and that's all that's ever going to matter. We're going to hit our first ad break here, but when we come back, do want to talk kind of playing off that conversation. How do you get to being the best organization? How do you get to being a team that has the healthiest pipeline and the best scouting and spending money? Well, we'll talk about some new guys, the minds that may be leaving the Cubs or maybe joining the Cubs, etc. When we come back.
All right, so first ad break here from CIRCA Sportsbook. Games will strive to be at CIRCA Sportsbook a -110 split on their menu, unlike other sport books, which may use -115 or -120 splits. CIRCA Sports keeps as little money as possible on large market bets, especially compared to other books. CIRCA Sports does not limit players based on their winnings. Every player has the same limits, unlike other books who do limit winning players, and there are real people behind the CIRCA Sports brand who resolve any issues you have in a timely manner, unlike other books who use chatbots. All aspects of the app are being run by the same team that runs the main CIRCA Sportsbook at CIRCA Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. So download the CIRCA Sports Illinois at circasports.com/Illinois-app to sign up today. Also, be on the lookout for CIRCA events, watch parties, and tailgates. If you or somebody you know may have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, 1-800-426-2537. Text GAMB to 833-234 or visit areyoureallywinning.com. Second break here from our sponsor, Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry about buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time solves all your problems. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all those sporting events, music, comedy, theater events near you. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I use Game Time all year. I gave Game Time to my friends who were going to those games in Arizona. I actually looked at the app for the World Series. For a split second, I thought about going to the World Series in Arizona. I may end up doing that. If I do, I would use Game Time. And again, you can see the view from your seat before you buy, which is nice. You can see what you're paying for. And all the prices you see are your total upfront. So you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. And you can buy tickets in a second with just 2 taps. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. And if you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% off the difference. So download the Game Time app today, create an account, use code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code CHGO for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Have you ever been to a World Series game, Brendan?
2001. I was there. Yeah. I
Which
couldn't.
one?
D-backs, Yankees.
No, which game?
Game 1 at Chase Field.
Gotcha.
It was sick. It was like it was like I can remember the flashing cameras when they still had cameras back then in the first pitch. Sticks out in my mind. I never went to 2016. I was not like you. I couldn't emotionally handle going to Cubs World Series games. So I intentionally did not go because I didn't want to walk out the stadium with a loss. I can't do that.
Yeah, the first World Series game I ever went to was back when I was in school at Michigan, and the Giants beat the Tigers in Detroit.
Oh, nice.
I remember, and they win that World Series, I think, on Sergio Romo freezing Miguel Cabrera on a pitch.
That was 2010, right?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
So that was the first game I went to, but yes, then I did go to the games here at beautiful historic Wrigley Field in 2016, and famously Game 7 in Cleveland, which the Chicago Cubs won.
I cannot believe you put yourself through that in person.
That was just something that was always true. I remember, and my mom or dad would vouch for this, that I always said, no matter what, if I have no money in my bank account or whatever, I have to be there when they finally win.
See, I'm not willing to risk my emotions to go to those games.
Yeah.
I'm being dead serious about that. Otherwise, I would have been like you. I just couldn't do it.
I need to be there. But let's get back to this current team. So on Thursday, we got a rumor from John Morosi saying, quote, the Mets have had discussions about hiring Dan Kantrovitz for a high-level position overseeing their amateur scouting and player development departments. Kantrovitz is currently the Cubs' vice president of scouting. So if you listened to Brendan and I last Friday, we warned you of the possibility of Craig Breslow leaving for a top position in the Boston Red Sox front office. He got that position in the Boston Red Sox front office. So if you want our thoughts on that, we can offer a little, but we did spend about, I think it was 30 minutes sort of preempting that move last week. So you can listen to that in your podcast feed or watch on the CHGO Sports YouTube page, of course. I think our feeling on that was generally look, and I think you put this really well. I think it might have been on Twitter, but you probably said it on the show last Friday as well. Hiring good people, when you have good people, they're going to get good jobs and they're going to leave for, better jobs. You can't always give good people better jobs, right? Because hopefully you also have good people in better jobs, right? That said, though, right, also, there was a rumor, not a rumor, a report on Thursday from Ken Rosenthal that Andy Green interviewed for the Cleveland Guardians managerial job. And, potentially, if he's interviewing for one, potentially interviewing for more than that. So I think our thoughts on Breslow were pretty clear. He's a great person. He has a great reputation. This is definitely a loss, but hopefully you can continue to find good people and bring in new ideas, new thoughts, and continue the process of development, right? When you start to lose several people, right, you do it's not even necessarily about the individual people, right? But that's a potential lot of turnover. Brendan, 5 days after the World Series ends, free agency can begin. You're going to get some of those option decisions. You hit the ground running. And the Kantrovitz thing is just a rumor for now. The Andy Green thing, we'll see if he actually gets any of those open managerial jobs. And that's a coaching staff thing, different than the front office. But that's a lot of brain power and good people, right, to turn over. I think it's a good thing that other organizations think the Cubs are doing things well, right? That's what you want people to think and believe that you have good people. But losing several people in short order, maybe a bit of a challenge for Jed.
Are you freaking out?
No.
I mean, neither am I.
My general look, my general philosophy on this is what it's always been. We don't always know what everyone is doing, right? I remember reading one of those books, and I think they explained that it was Jed who was insistent that Pedro Strop be included in the Jake Arrieta trade, right? And if you just looked at that, you wouldn't know that, right? Jed wasn't the one running the show at the time. It was Theo. You don't know who to ascribe credit for everything to. And you look at like so much of what Kantrovitz has been in charge of, the draft and, amateur scouting and stuff like that. Like there's a lot that goes into that, man. There are scouts all over the world that are sending these reports, like people that are influencing the decisions. It's not to punt the idea that these are good people and these could be bad losses, but Jed's identified good people to bring in the organization in those respects and before, and you have to trust that he can continue to do it.
Well, those people bring in people to the front office too that remain. So,
right.
Like they go away, but to some degree, their presence still remains in those who worked for him.
Sure.
And same thing with Breslow. Just because he goes away doesn't mean, oh no, all of our resources and thoughts and processes are gone. It might change. Could it be good? Maybe. Could it be bad? Also, maybe, right? But at the very least, these guys go away. Their tools generally remain. You know what works. Jed and Carter have been working with Dan Kantrovitz for what now? 3 years, 3.5 years since 2020. So they have an idea, right? And they also brought in Dan from outside the organization. The one point of credit I'll give this front office over the past 3 years is Jed did do a good job of accelerating the innovation where it was bleak for a while in 2019. I will give him credit for that. He did so by carving out new roles for Craig Breslow, getting him into the front office as I think the official role was like vice president. So he was up there making the moves, player acquisition as well, or at least in the conversation. So that was unique coming from like the more like coaching side. So I'll give him credit for that. Of course, having the entire pitching infrastructure, hiring coordinators, giving Breslow the freedom to bulk that up. And also Carter with Dan Kantrovitz coming outside the organization, previously with Oakland and St. Louis, and bulking up the scouting department where you're getting guys fast through the system. Jordan Wicks, Matt Shaw looks like an unbelievable draft pick.
Kate Horton, yeah.
Yeah, Kate Horton is an unbelievable draft pick, targeting guys in trades like PCA, Alcantara, that at the time seemed rather risky, but paying off so far given their current value. So that's where the front office did a lot of good. And as a result, I expect that process that got those guys is solid. That's like, yes, this has worked. That's your precedence. This can work. And you will need to fill those holes, but you've done it before, and their ghost remains in the organization,
right,
in part through their hires and the tools they've developed.
And I think, and you can probably speak better to this than I can, or, some of our friends over at Cubs on Deck, can certainly, I think, speak to this, the Gregs, if you will, the Gregs and Brian. But like this one, maybe less so than Breslow. Like, it's hard to identify, again, exactly what all these front office executives are doing and what their hand is in. Like, on the draft in particular, like, the Cubs aren't really viewed as like a top tier drafting team, right? Like, a lot of the guys you just mentioned are first round picks.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're all first round picks primarily of the guys you mentioned. You look at who's starting even on the team for the Cubs, and that's not necessarily Kantrovitz. He didn't draft Nico Horner, but like, Nico Horner's a first round pick. Ian Happ's a first round pick. Like, they seem to be able to get those right, but the teams that are really viewed as like the best in the draft are the ones who are getting those second round picks, third round picks, fifth round picks, like identifying the talent there, right? So I'm not saying that I don't care about, Kantrovitz, but all I'm saying is it's not an area where they're viewed as elite necessarily in terms of their drafting. So of all the areas, it's not my primary concern about losing necessarily the chief decision maker. Where I do sort of get at least a little concerned is how I kind of started this conversation. It's potentially a lot at once, right? And so soon before you enter what most of us are viewing as a pretty like consequential offseason. And that's not to say that Dan Kantrovitz or Craig Breslow are the people, whispering to Jed Hoyer, like, trade for Juan Soto, right? Like, right? Like, that's not necessarily the stuff that they're immediately
you never
helping
know.
on.
You never
but
know.
It's a lot of brain drain. So it is going to be a challenge, I think, for Jed and his front office to continue identifying good people. They have a good track record of that, and not only just people that are viewed as good at their jobs, but good reputations as people, right? Like the fact that other organizations are interested in your people is reflective of a good and healthy organization, right? And guys that have good reputations. So he's going to be put to the test to identify that, or he's going to be making a lot of decisions without people in those positions if you're trying to do your due diligence and interviews and things like that. So that's possibly where my concern comes in.
There's a lot of job openings. Should I apply to those job openings? They're all over the place.
Listen, there was a post from Jeremy Frank, who had been a really good follow on Twitter for, I believe his handle was MLB Random Stats, so stats, saying that he now works for the Chicago Cubs, that they were looking for like data nerds, and I don't know a bigger data nerd than you. So go fix it. You do it.
I'm gonna replace Dan Kantrovitz.
See, this is where our YouTube chat should be telling you, well, you have all these big ideas, go do it. You fix the team then, and stop complaining.
Well, I like complaining too much. That's the problem. I enjoy complaining. It's my outlet to vent to you, Corey. Let's do the second ad break here. We'll come back. Still a lot to talk about. I think we want to get into the Kyle Hendricks stuff, but I think my last point with the front office is that to reference what Jed said, the skeleton's there even with the front office. You have to go back in and fill some of the voids. Like you, I do share some of the concern having to do it so fast in a crucial offseason. But how it works from the different levels underneath Dan, I'm not quite confident in, if it's like solely dependent on Dan as an executive, or if there's other pieces still functioning in the temporary without Dan that will need to get resolved in the next year or so. But I don't know, my gut reaction is I'm not super concerned about it, it kind of sucks to see these guys go. They deserve opportunities. It just sucks they're leaving for other opportunities, but
I think, again, like I think there's some reaction that I see on social media and this other stuff that is like utter panic. And I'm like, I don't know, right? Like, do we really know that this is like worth panicking over? We don't know what everybody's doing on a day-to-day basis, right?
What is worth panicking over? What would qualify as a justifiable panic? Yeah,
but I think, again, the concern is that it's a lot of turnover at once, and it just provides the opportunity. Like, I think going into an offseason like this, you would just love like a stable feeling. Like everybody's ready and set. The plan is in action. The people are ready to attack this offseason and nail it. And I'm not saying that that's not the case if they lose Craig Breslow, which they did, or they lose Dan Kantrovitz, which they might. But it just presents that opportunity. Like, hey, these people that were at the forefront of this ship, along with Jed and Carter Hawkins, aren't going to be there. And so you either have to replace them with guys that can step into that role and kill it pretty quickly, or hope, like you said, that the skeletons that these guys have provided and put in place for the organization are able to be followed and kind of lead you in the right direction until you do find those high-quality replacements.
Yep. Okay, let's do these ad breaks here. We'll come back out and talk about some Kyle Hendricks, I believe. All right, ad break here from our new sponsor, Soul Savvy. This is perfect for our good friend Cody Demendo, Corey. The Drops by Soul Savvy app makes it easy to keep up with all the latest news, releases, raffles, and sales in the sneaker world. It's your one-stop shop for everything sneakers. You have drop alert, instant notifications. You can never miss a release again. You'll get instantly notified when your shoe size is available to buy. You can keep track of all the raffles that happen in the sneaker world with our raffle tracker. And whether you're a casual buyer or like our good friend Cody, an all-out sneakerhead, Soul Savvy has something for you. 3 different levels, the basic version or mobile plus or premium. And this Saturday, October 28th, the Air Jordan 12 Cherry drops. And the Drops by Soul Savvy will notify you when and where it's dropping. So you got to download the app and you will never miss a release like the one on Saturday. Sign up for Soul Savvy by clicking the link in the description below or by visiting links.soulsavvy.com/CHGO, or head over to the App Store and download the Drops by Soul Savvy app. Another break here from CDJR, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram. Are you in the market for a new vehicle? If you are, then we have some great news for you. Ray, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram in Fox Lake have just joined the CHGO team. At Ray CDJR, you'll always be able to shop one of Chicagoland's largest inventories and find unforgettable savings. And right now, during Ram Power Days at Ray CDJR only in Fox Lake, you'll be able to secure 0% financing or 17% off new Ram models, but that's not it. Through October 31st, explore their new renovated showroom and take advantage of limited time 7-year anniversary savings. So if you're in the market for a new vehicle, then you have to check out the team at Ray, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram, because they are the only team we recommend. Visit them today on Route 12 in Fox Lake. For more information, visit Ray CDJR in Fox Lake or raycdjr.com today. Serving the community since 1963, the Ernie Banks days, Corey.
Yes, sir. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that thumbs up. We do appreciate that. Let's talk about Kyle Hendricks, Brendan.
Okay.
So, rumors in either direction, right? So it started with a report that the Cubs were potentially working to an extension that would keep him. He has, the 1 year left with the option, and reports that they would extend beyond that, right? Then again on Thursday, Jesse Rogers said, "I'm not really hearing that. Maybe it's something they do, but I don't get the sense that that's imminent, and they'd have to talk about that." So, rumors on both directions. So I think the appropriate conversation is, should they do that, right? Like, if and when it happens, is that something they should be doing? And what would the logic be around doing that?
So this is a multifaceted conversation, because it's not a Kyle Hendricks binary yes or no decision. To me, the way I think about the potential extension is who will get 375 innings of under 3.5, 3.3 ERA. It's a big ask, right? The top teams have those top two guys. You can slot them in. Who will do that for the Cubs? Are they relying on Justin Steele to do that? Are they relying on Marcus Stroman to do that? We don't even know if Marcus Stroman will opt in. We're presuming he does, but you just don't know. So my thinking is, if the Cubs don't have 375 innings locked in atop the rotation, they can slot in for that projected value, and they are not willing to go over the luxury tax at 277, that upper tier, before you start losing draft picks. Then the question is, does Kyle Hendricks make sense in this context? And ultimately, if the Cubs are not willing to go over that upper tier of the luxury tax and have to go out, make moves that require not extending Hendricks, then you, unfortunately, as a Kyle Hendricks fan, have to do that. Now, if you go out and you shore up the top end of your rotation, you can accept some of the risk in bringing Kyle back. And I would support that, given the potential asking price is going to be under $16 million for your AAV, given what they've been talking about, to lower the overall AAV, maybe around 12 to 14 for 2-3 years. I think that does make a lot of sense. You do have to consider, despite the success he had, didn't pitch the entire year, hasn't pitched the entire year in 3 seasons now, getting up there in age, has a legitimate shoulder structural problem. He's not projected, should never be projected as your workhorse top 3 guys. And the Cubs right now don't have your workhorse top 3 guys. So the way I think about it is, right now he's lower on the priority list. And I don't have a good opinion whether or not to bring him back. My opinion is they better shore up the top end of the rotation somehow.
Well, and I mean, I think going off of some of our other conversations, I think your opinion is it makes sense to do as long as you're spending as you should be, right?
Yeah.
So, but we just don't know if they're going to.
If they had Jake Arrieta and John Lester, of course you extend them, don't even think about it, but they don't have those types of pitchers right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, if you're willing to spend the money to make sure that you're shoring up these things so that little money like this doesn't hurt, then yeah, it's absolutely something they should be doing. Especially you and I were talking about, how do you deal with some of that stuff last week? Like, this is one of those creative paths to lowering the annual average value per year, right? And obviously you're extending a player for longer and putting money on the books in the future. But when we were talking about, like, how do you move money around? Do you have to include it in a trade? Do you have to do this? Do you have to do that? This is one of those ways you do that.
To push back on that, though, it's like, let's say they extend it for 2 years, $24 million, $12 million annual average value. Right now he's slotted in, if you pick it up, at $16 million. So you save $4 million. Congratulations. Like,
well, maybe you can get a reliever at the deadline for that.
I understand it, but it conflicts with all the other processes they've had with Mancini and Barnhart. It's like,
I
know. I'm going back in time.
I don't really think that that's an apt comparison. That's a strange one, even for you.
Well, what I'm trying to say...
Kyle had a 3.7 ERA and a 3.8 FIP last year.
No, I'm not comparing him. I'm not comparing him to those guys. What I'm saying is saving $4 million for AAV, yes, it has an impact, but it's ultimately, that's not a tipping point savings for me. Like 12 to 16.
Well, but sure, the idea would be that, okay, you have to keep doing that.
Yeah, where's the 20 to 30 million savings?
Well, that's not, I don't get paid the money to do that. You and I talked about that.
But that's my point.
I said, there's other ways to do that. Do you send prospects and get there's other ways to do this, right? And I'm not saying that they should do any of those things, but if they need to get creative because they're not willing to spend a certain level over the highest threshold of the luxury tax, well, then you have to get creative. That's what we talked about, right?
To reduce it down, right now, if Kyle is extended for $16 million, they're on $210 million committed when you pick up Young Gums. You sign Bellinger for $25-30, you go from $210, $235 to $240, you're above that first tier, right? So if you don't sign Kyle, you go below that first tier at $237. That's kind of the reduction of the scenario.
I think you need the pitching depth, though, man. We saw that, and I'm with you. You and I are in agreement. You need that kind of top of the rotation arm to really kind of push you to that next level. But I think you need the depth. Kyle was really good last year, and I think that this would make sense. And at least, again, it's a small amount of money, but you might be able to buy something with that small amount of money that you didn't have last year that you really could have needed. I do understand, though, without knowing how much they're going to spend, how willing they are to enter into each of those luxury tax thresholds, I understand that it maybe is not of the highest priority, which I think was basically what Jesse Rogers was kind of discussing. I think he was on the radio, and sort of was like, it's not the primary concern right now. Like, they've got other stuff they have to deal with. So,
and I'm not quite sure I like the multi-year commitment. I love Kyle, but it starts.
Well, so that was what I was going to ask you. You've dug into him more than most people. He was good last year.
Yeah, he was.
Is he not the type of person that you see aging well at a certain point, or what would even your concern be? It seems like a very small amount of money.
He has a capsular tear. Like very few. If my memory serves me correct, he'd be the only one to do this, where he's a consistent, 150 plus inning guy, 125 plus inning guy for multiple years. It just doesn't happen. So I don't have like a history of saying, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense in a multi-year contract. Sure. He's already 35 years old. And then these deals start to snowball, right? Like, you can't just ignore what happened last season.
No, I understand.
They didn't go over the luxury tax.
Yeah.
That cost them potentially a playoff spot. So that's where I get a little uneasy. He was great last year. If he continues pitching exactly how he did, of course it makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. And I think a lot of us are going to be scarred by that kind of rollover money that you gave Mancini and Barnhart.
But dude,
and Smiley
it was not even that year. They did that during the Brandon Morrow days. That's why you had to go up.
Yeah.
That's why Descalso was signed. Like, there's parallels when you start playing at these tiers of luxury taxes. These presumably low contract commitments end up making an impact. So it's like, do I want to spend $12 million per year for the next 2-3 years? I don't know, man. Like, to me, that actually might be a risk given the injury concerns.
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, like, this is where I landed last week when we talked about the luxury tax and the payroll. Like, they're gonna have to spend over it. They're gonna have to eat the penalties. Like, I know they don't want to give up those draft slots at that absolute highest tier, but you're gonna have to spend and eat some penalties to make this work. And if this is one part of, hey, how do we move some money around, maintain some depth and guys that we like in the organization? I think it's a small step toward doing that, but I understand in the bigger picture where you're coming from.
I'm operating, as you always say, under Tom Ricketts reality.
Right.
Know? Like, that's how it is.
Yes. If it was up to you and I, they would spend $400 million.
Kyle
and none of this
would
is
have
an issue.
a commitment to the day he retires, and then he takes over Craig Breslau's role. That would be
if you and I ran the team, John Lester would still be in the rotation or the DH.
Probably the DH. Actually.
Yeah. So, I think he's a better hitter than Luis Torrens for what that's worth.
That's not really a bold
more
statement
dead
whatsoever.
money for you.
Well, he has more power than Nick Madrigal too.
Right.
He does.
Yeah, so look, again, you can kind of read those reports any way you want, but reiterating that the one on Thursday was, really Jesse Rogers going the complete opposite direction of that first one. Basically,
yeah, that's a weird one, right? Because typically you don't get such misalignments among these reports from the Cubs sphere, so that's a weird one.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I don't know. It ebbs and flows, right? Like, I think that first report was Bruce Levine. And sometimes it seems that Bruce is like bang on like some of this stuff. And other times we've heard, just stuff that wasn't really true. Like, wasn't he the one that was banging the Jose Abreu drum, which turned out to just not really be a thing that the Cubs were interested in? So, and I think that's true of all reporters, right? They're reporting what they hear. Sometimes for different guys, there's motive behind that, right? The front office is putting out rumors that they want out there, things like that. So, you have to decipher this stuff for yourself. That's why I keep saying the Bellinger stuff is going to make us all sick, right? Because you're going to be getting these nonsense reports. You're going to be getting those random like Twitter accounts that claim they have sources and this and that. It's going to be like a knife to the gut every 30 seconds, right? But again, I think it was worth discussing the possibility of it. And yeah, look, I mean, I think ultimately a lot of the lens of what the Cubs do is going to have to be looked through. How much money are they going to spend and what is the priority, right? And without knowing that they're going to blow past some of these luxury tax levels, I understand where you're coming from, where it's like, well, look, every dollar is precious, right? And until Cody Bellinger or somebody like him is in that lineup for sure. And then adding on top of that to the lineup, like, I don't really care about, some of this like extra money, right? And where it's going. Like, we got to handle the big stuff first. So I do understand that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the parallel too is the Clayton Kershaw contracts, like he just gets extended 1 year, every year by the Dodgers. And I think from Clayton's perspective, he has family, young kids in Los Angeles, the familiarity, the consistent environment. Kyle, I believe he's having a kid soon, isn't he? So I'm sure he wants that stability with his wife. I can very easily see a scenario where Kyle takes a substantial relative pay cut just to keep everything uniform, consistent from a family perspective.
You do that. That's creative.
Would you babysit his kid?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just lower the AAV as much as you possibly can.
$2 million
Give Kyle whatever job he wants, right? Make him the director of pitching right now.
That's what I've been saying.
Right?
We always have player managers.
Two birds, one stone.
Let's have player executives. Let's be really innovative.
Lower the AAV completely. Pay him league minimum next year, right? Yeah. But then he's also working in the front office. Can you separate those salaries?
That's actually a genius move. That's a genius move.
Get Jed on the phone. Who has Jed's number?
You should be in a front office, Corey.
Well, I tried that, and everybody else didn't agree. So
I think you deserve a second chance.
Man. All right, one more ad break here before we wrap things up. Want to start again by reminding you guys to visit allchgo.com and check out becoming a diehard member. Of course, you guys know CHGO has podcast live shows on every team every day. I already mentioned our great CHGO Bulls team kicking off the season on Wednesday night. CHGO Bears team continues to kill it. CHGO Blackhawks team with a kind of renewed spotlight on that team with Connor Bedard. They are killing it. We've got the Sky, the Fire, the Red Stars, everything at allchgo.com. Premium written content over at allchgo.com. And if you sign up to become a diehard, you get 20% off events. We've got some more tailgates coming up. Bulls takeovers, Blackhawks takeovers. You get dope merch. You get a free shirt when you sign up to become a member, access to the members-only Discord. And for the next couple tailgates, we already had the one winner, I think a couple weeks ago, but X Golf will be giving away a $200 gift certificate to any of their Chicagoland locations. You can find the nearest X Golf at playxgolf.com/Chicagoland. And of course, you have to attend the CHGO Bears tailgate, best in the city, to be eligible to enter for those X Golf giveaways.
Have you gone yet?
To a tailgate?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
You have. I want to go. They look fun.
Yeah, they're a good time. Obviously, in Chicago, very hit or miss, right? Because I think the last one that we did, weather was very nice, and then one of the ones I went to last year, it was very cold.
Do they have the cornhole game at the tailgate? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, of course.
Do you
Bags,
play it?
Chi-Town Cornhole, of course. Yeah,
I would be the best one there.
Sometimes Luke is slanging drinks, like it's a
Luke.
vibe.
Are Luke Stuckmeyers?
Yes, sir.
Really?
Not drinking them, but handing them out or helping oversee the drink consumption. Which I don't know if you did this intentionally, but kind of Luke Stuckmeyer style, a good lead-in, because Brendan, what beer he's slanging at those CHGO Bears tailgates, that, of course, would be Goose Island. CHGO is supported by the Goose Island Beer Company, Chicago's beer since 1988. The incredible beer roster. You've got the Oktoberfest flowing now. We're in those autumn months. It's perfect for those crisp fall evenings where you're longing and dreaming that you were watching the Cubs in the World Series instead of the Diamondbacks and the Rangers. The Beer Hug family, the Full Pocket Pilsner, which goes great in a Wrigley Field beer bat. If you have it, just ask our friend Cody Del Mendo.
Or me.
And of course, my favorite, the classic, the 312 Wheat Ale. You can grab ultra fresh brewery exclusive beers at the Goose Island Original Brew House on Clybourne Avenue in Lincoln Park. As I always say, they have a great smash burger there. Or from their tap room on Fulton Street in Westtown. Of course, Goose Island Beer Company, Chicago's beer.
There you go.
Yes. And to add on the end of the tailgates, I am notoriously a bad temperature dresser, right? So for those tailgates, I will look at the temperature in Chicago and I'll say, I need X amount of layers to be warm. I'm always wrong. I'm always freezing. I don't even know how
to prepare for that.
Huh?
I don't even know how to prepare. I don't even own a winter jacket.
Well, I mean, if you ever made it out here, which, we'll see if that ever happens.
Well, I do. When I go out there, you go to Hawaii. So, you intentionally leave the state when I go. Did that not happen?
I stand by the decision. Anyway, wrapping up, something to put on the radar just as we sign off here in a second. Like I said, 5 days after the World Series, free agency is eligible to begin. So if we get a sweep, that window wouldn't open before you and I talk again next Friday, but it is possible the World Series ends before you and I talk again next Friday, which would mean you kind of have to get ready for those dates. By that date, player and club options must also be officially exercised, and also 5 days after the World Series, that same date, qualifying offers must be officially extended to the players that you would like to extend them to by that date. November 15th, protection from the Rule 5 draft. November 17th, the non-tender deadline. December 3rd, the winter meeting. So just always putting on your radar that this stuff ratchets up pretty quickly once the season is over. Still a lot of stuff to happen here. We're wondering if Craig Counsell is going to leave the Brewers. Rumors that the Mets are indeed interested after taking David Stearns. I would bet that happens because he said he would return to the Brewers for the right amount of money, but they won't give it to him, and the Mets will. So we'll see. But it would be nice to have him and David Stearns out of the division. With the Cubs losing some of their front office guys, those are two very powerful people in the Milwaukee organization. So at least they can also deal with some brain drain, I think on a higher level, looking at those two guys. But we shall see. As always, Monday through Thursday, usually at 1:20. Cody, Luke, Ryan will have you covered for the CHGO Cubs podcast live here on the CHGO Sports YouTube page. They had a great interview earlier this week with our friend from Bleacher Nation, Michael Cerami. Michael's been a great guest for Brendan and I over many years, so check that episode out. Brendan and I will talk to you again next Friday. We might have a new World Series champion, and we might be really in the offseason and ready for the Cubs and Jed Hoyer and company to kick this thing into gear. So, as always, thank you for tuning in to the CHGO Cubs podcast. We appreciate your support. We will talk to you again soon, and as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.